He had every advantage money could buy, yet somehow he kept failing. The son of a billionaire, raised in mansions with private tutors, endless resources, and the kind of opportunities most kids could only dream about, was still at the bottom of his class. No matter how hard his father pushed him, or how much was spent on top-tier schools, the boy just couldn't pass his tests. His name was Daniel, and while the world saw him as the privileged heir to a fortune, he carried a secret weight of shame. He wasn't lazy, he wasn't careless, he simply felt lost. Like the harder he tried, the more he slipped further behind. And as the disappointment in his father's eyes grew heavier, Daniel began to believe he might never be good enough. Then came a change no one in the family expected. A new maid was hired, a young black woman named Grace, who had taken the job, not just to support herself but also to help her younger siblings back home. She wasn't polished like the wealthy tutors Daniel had known, nor did she carry herself with the cold detachment of those who worked for a paycheck and left. Grace had something different about her, an energy that made people feel seen, a patience that drew others in. Though her position in the house was simple, she noticed things most people overlooked. And one of the first things she noticed was Daniel's silence, his constant frustration, and the way he avoided talking about school. At first, Daniel barely looked at her. In his world, maids came and went, their faces blurring into the background of his life. But Grace wasn't like the others. She spoke to him like he mattered, not like he was just the billionaire's son. She saw through his guarded expressions, asking gentle questions and offering encouragement without judgment. Slowly, Daniel found himself opening up to her in ways he never had with his father or any of his tutors. But what could a maid possibly teach the son of a billionaire that elite schools and expensive tutors had failed to? That question hung heavy in the air, even for Daniel himself. Yet, Grace carried her own story of struggle, determination, and resilience, qualities that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with grit. She believed knowledge wasn't about memorizing facts but about truly understanding, and she was about to show Daniel a different way of learning. It started with small lessons in the quiet corners of the house, away from his father's expectations and the pressure of grades. But what neither of them knew was that these moments would not only change Daniel's future but also shake the entire household in ways no one could predict. And just as Daniel began to see the first spark of hope, something happened that put everything at risk. Daniel had grown up surrounded by wealth, but in many ways, he was more trapped than free. His father, a powerful billionaire, who believed success was everything, had shaped the house into a place of pressure. Every wall seemed to whisper about expectations: perfect grades, perfect image, perfect future. To outsiders, Daniel was lucky, but inside, he felt like a prisoner of goals he could never reach. His father's voice echoed in his mind with every failed exam, every report card that came back stained with red ink. No amount of tutors, private schools, or state-of-the-art study rooms could fix what seemed broken inside him. Grace, on the other hand, came from a world completely different. She had grown up with very little, her childhood marked by challenges that had forced her to grow up faster than most. Working as a maid in the mansion wasn't part of her dream, but it was a step she needed to take. What she carried, though, was something money couldn't buy: patience, resilience, and the belief that no one was beyond saving. She watched Daniel closely, and while others dismissed him as spoiled or lazy, she noticed the quiet determination beneath his frustration. He didn't want to fail, he simply didn't know how to learn in the way he needed. It was in the smallest details that Grace saw the truth. The way Daniel clenched his fists while reading, the panic in his eyes when numbers filled a page, the way he pretended not to care when his father scolded him. Grace realized he wasn't dumb at all, he was struggling with something deeper, something no one had bothered to understand. Instead of piling on pressure, she began to look for ways to connect. She would slip learning into conversations, using stories, games, and even chores around the house as hidden lessons. Daniel didn't even realize at first that she was teaching him. Still, the mansion was not a place where such friendship went unnoticed. The other staff whispered about Grace spending time with the billionaire's son, warning her to keep her distance. They feared that if the father discovered it, she could lose her job instantly, but Grace couldn't turn away. Every day she saw Daniel grow a little more confident, asking questions he had once been afraid to speak out loud. Their bond became a quiet secret, tucked into the corners of the house where no one else was watching. Yet beneath the progress they were making, there was a storm building. Daniel's father was growing impatient, demanding results, and arranging for yet another expensive tutor to arrive soon. Grace knew the truth, that if her quiet lessons were discovered, everything could fall apart. And just as Daniel started to believe he might finally prove himself, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, and a door swung open at the wrong moment. The door creaked open, and Daniel froze, his pencil slipping from his hand. Grace's voice went silent, mid-sentence, her eyes darting toward the figure standing in the hallway. It wasn't his father, at least not yet, but Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper who had been with the family for years. She had seen everything. The notebook spread across the table, Daniel leaning forward with interest, and Grace sitting beside him like a teacher instead of a maid. Her sharp eyes narrowed, and for a moment no one breathed. Without a word, She closed the door and walked away, but the message was clear. Secrets didn't stay hidden long in this mansion. From that day, Daniel carried a new fear. It wasn't just about failing tests anymore, it was about what would happen if his father discovered what Grace had been doing. His father believed in structure, in results that could be measured, and he had little patience for anything that looked like weakness. Grace's way was the opposite, slower, gentler, filled with understanding. If his father found out, Daniel knew he wouldn't just be scolded. Grace would be blamed, maybe even dismissed, and the one person who finally understood him would be gone. Meanwhile, Grace was carrying her own quiet battles. She had left behind siblings who depended on her paychecks. Every dollar she sent home was food on their table, clothes for school, medicine when one of them fell sick. Losing this job would mean more than just her own hardship. It would ripple across her family's lives. And yet, every time she looked at Daniel's tired eyes and saw the small spark of hope returning, she knew she couldn't stop. Something inside her refused to let him sink deeper into failure and self-doubt. The other staff whispered more now, their words reaching Daniel's ears. Some said Grace was overstepping her role. Others claimed she was using kindness as a way to gain favor in the household. Daniel hated hearing it, but it only made him more protective of her. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just thinking about himself, he was worried about someone else, and that feeling began to change. At the same time, his father was making plans of his own. Another tutor was scheduled to arrive within the week. This one flown in from abroad with the reputation of being unbreakable. The billionaire believed this new instructor would finally force discipline into his son, but Daniel knew the truth. Another stranger barking rules would only crush the fragile progress he had made. Each day the tension built higher. Grace and Daniel worked in silence, listening for footsteps in the hall, always ready to close the books at the sound of a door. The mansion itself felt like a ticking clock, every second counting down to the moment their secret would be exposed. And when Daniel overheard his father on a late-night phone call, promising that this new tutor would fix the boy or send him away, his heart sank. He realized their time was running out, and the choice would come sooner than he thought. The day the new tutor arrived, the mansion felt heavier than usual. The staff moved quickly, polishing furniture and straightening curtains, as though preparing for royalty. Daniel sat in his room, staring at his reflection in the mirror, his stomach in knots. He already knew this tutor wouldn't see him the way Grace did. To the man his father had hired, he would just be another spoiled heir who needed discipline. But Daniel also knew that this time, something was different. He wasn't the same boy who had once accepted failure as his fate. Grace had shown him another way, and he couldn't let that go. Grace, too, felt the weight of the moment. She had continued helping Daniel quietly, even after Mrs. Whitmore's suspicious eyes followed her in the halls. She had promised herself that as long as he needed her, she would not give up. But now, with the arrival of the new tutor, the danger grew sharper. One mistake, one word spoken at the wrong time, and her position in the mansion could be gone in an instant. Still, when she looked at Daniel's pale face that morning, she whispered softly, "Remember what you've already learned. Don't let fear take it away from you." The tutor, a tall man with a commanding presence, wasted no time. He gathered Daniel in the study with thick books and stern instructions. Grace wasn't allowed inside, but Daniel could feel her absence like a shadow missing from the room. Hours dragged on as the man barked questions, scribbled problems on the board, and scolded every mistake. Daniel's chest tightened with each correction, his old panic flooding back. He could hear his father's footsteps pacing the hallway outside, waiting for results, waiting for proof that this expensive experiment was worth it. By the second day, Daniel felt the walls closing in. He wanted to remember Grace's way she tied words to simple stories, the way she used laughter to ease the pressure, but under the tutor's sharp eyes, his mind went blank. The harder he tried, the more mistakes he made. His father's disappointment was already written in the silence that followed each lesson. That evening, when Grace found him sitting alone in the library, his face buried in his arms, she didn't say a word at first. She just sat beside him, letting the silence fill with understanding. Finally Daniel whispered, "If I fail again, he'll never look at me the same." Grace looked at him steadily, her voice low but firm. "Then let's make sure you don't fail your way, not his." But neither of them knew that outside the door, someone was listening. Heavy footsteps shifted on the polished floorboards, pausing long enough to catch the sound of Grace's voice. The door handle turned slowly, and in that breathless moment, it became clear their secret was no longer safe. The truth was about to break open, and everything they had built together hung on what would happen next. The door swung open, and Daniel's heart nearly stopped. Standing in the doorway was not his father, as he feared, but Mrs. Whitmore again, this time with a look colder than before. She stepped inside, her voice sharp but quiet. "Do you realize what you're risking? If Mr. Harrington finds out, you've been teaching his son in secret. It won't just be your job on the line, Grace. It'll be your entire future." Daniel sat up quickly, panic flashing across his face. He wanted to speak, but Grace placed a calming hand on his arm. Mrs. Whitmore leaned closer, lowering her tone so only they could hear. "The new tutor already suspects something. He told your father this morning that Daniel shows strange patterns like he's been learning outside of his lessons. He's watching you both, and if he catches even the smallest proof, you'll both pay the price." With that, she left as suddenly as she came, leaving an icy silence behind her. Daniel turned to Grace, fear written all over his face. The pressure was already unbearable, and now it had doubled. Not only did he have to survive the relentless demands of the tutor and the looming judgment of his father, but he also had to protect Grace from being discovered. If she lost this job, her family would suffer, and Daniel couldn't live with being the cause of that. But the twist neither of them expected came later that evening. As Daniel walked past his father's study, he overheard voices his father and the tutor in a hushed but heated conversation. The tutor was saying something Daniel could barely believe. "Sir, with all respect, your son may not be failing because of laziness. There's something else he learns differently. Forcing him through drills will break him, not fix him. Someone's already teaching him another way, and it's working." Daniel's chest tightened. The tutor knew. Worse, he wasn't entirely against the idea of a different method, but his father's response was stone cold. "I don't care about excuses," the billionaire snapped. "I don't want creativity, I want results. Whoever has been filling his head with soft ideas is undermining me, and I'll root them out." Daniel stumbled back from the door, his pulse racing. The truth was closer to being exposed than ever, and now, it wasn't just a matter of suspicion. His father was actively hunting for the person behind his progress. Grace's secret help, the only thing keeping Daniel afloat, was about to be dragged into the light. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway was louder than ever, each second counting down to a confrontation he knew was coming. He understood one thing clearly: the next choice he made would decide not only his own future, but also Grace's, and maybe even the fragile bond they had built in the shadows of that mansion. The next morning, the mansion felt like a battlefield. Daniel knew today could change everything. Either his father would finally see him as a failure, or he would prove that Grace's lessons had made all the difference. When the tutor arrived, he noticed immediately that Daniel carried a new confidence, a quiet determination in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Daniel had spent the night practicing, recalling every technique Grace had taught him, finding ways to solve problems that no amount of drills could have taught. The tutor began his lesson with the usual intensity, firing questions one after another. Daniel's hands shook at first, but then he remembered Grace's words. Think differently, not harder. Find the answer your way. Slowly he began to answer correctly, explaining his reasoning clearly, connecting concepts in ways that surprised even the seasoned tutor. Each correct answer built momentum, each explanation a small victory over the fear that had held him back for so long. The tutor's eyes widened, and for the first time, he leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed. Midday, the father arrived, expecting to find Daniel floundering, ready to scold him for another failure. Instead, he found his son standing, tall, calmly solving problems that had caused him months of shame. The billionaire's brows furrowed in disbelief. Where did this come from?" he demanded. Daniel simply smiled faintly, feeling a strength he hadn't known he had. It was then that Grace stepped forward. She had been quietly observing from the doorway, knowing the time had come. "Sir," she said softly but firmly, "Daniel didn't fail because he was lazy. He needed to be understood in a way no one else tried. He's learned, and he's ready." The father's expression shifted, a mix of shock, pride, and something harder to define. He opened his mouth, ready to argue, but the tutor spoke first. "Sir, she's right. Daniel's progress isn't from punishment or drills. It's from guidance and understanding, something money alone cannot buy." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then the billionaire's shoulders relaxed, and for the first time, he smiled, not the controlling smile of a man dictating his son's future, but a real one. "I see now," he said quietly. "You've done more than teach him, you've helped him find himself." Just as relief washed over Daniel and Grace, an unexpected sound echoed from the hallway, the faint beeping of a phone. The father glanced at it and froze. Grace's heart sank. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. Asterisk, "We know about the lessons. Meet us tonight. No one can interfere." Asterisk, the mansion went quiet again, but this time with a different kind of tension. Daniel had won his father's respect. Grace had proven her worth. But a new threat had already appeared, one that neither money, status, nor clever teaching could solve. The real test, it seemed, was only beginning. Daniel stared at the phone, the sudden threat cutting through the relief he had felt just moments ago. His father, usually composed and intimidating, looked genuinely concerned. But instead of panic, something shifted in the room, a shared determination that whatever this new challenge was, they would face it together. Grace, standing quietly at the side, nodded at Daniel, silently reminding him that he wasn't alone anymore. Over the next few hours, the trio worked together to prepare. Daniel's father arranged for security to monitor the mansion, while Grace helped Daniel organize his thoughts and strategies. It became clear that this mysterious message was less about the lessons themselves, and more about someone outside, trying to exploit their progress. Yet in the process, Daniel realized something more important. He had grown in ways he never imagined. No longer was he a passive boy waiting to fail. He had learned how to think critically, adapt, and face challenges. Head-on. When evening came, the tension reached a peak. The unknown sender never appeared directly at the house, but their presence was felt in subtle signs: an unmarked car parked across the street, faint shadows slipping past the gates. Daniel's father, usually all business, turned to his son and said, "You've handled more today than most adults could. I see now what you're capable of." Daniel, feeling a surge of confidence, realized that the lessons Grace had taught him weren't just about tests. They were about courage, patience, and believing in himself, even when everything seemed against him. The night passed without incident, but it left a lasting impression on everyone. Daniel's father called the tutor the next morning and thanked him for his honesty, acknowledging that understanding and guidance were more powerful than fear and pressure. Grace, whose presence had been quietly transformative, was formally recognized by the family. She received more than just